that part of Africa that bothers me today. And that part of Africa is that increasingly, I see that academic work in Africa, whether it is in literature, philosophy, politics, or art, has significantly declined. Most of the books, I think in 2010, I went as a visiting professor at Yale, and the class I was going to teach was about Africa, and I had to do a course outline for the students, and in the course outline, I think there were only 1 or 2 books by an African, and the professor asked me, don't you, and there are many Africans you can have in this reading list, either by access to books about Africa has reduced, but the comment I wanted to make is that whether it is in literature, in art, in philosophy, in politics, there is very little output about Africa by Africans. I see a lot of work by non-Africans telling us who we are, what we want. And one of the consequences of that is our freedom today is fought for by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Our press freedom is fought by the Committee to Protect Journalists and by Reporters Without Borders. Our civil wars are ended by UN peacekeepers. Our refugees are fed by the UNHCR. Our economic policies are determined by the IMF and World Bank. Our poverty is fought by Bono and Jeffrey Sachs. Our crimes are adjudicated upon by the ICC. Our liberation is achieved through NATO warplanes. I just wanted you to comment on that part of Africa that is happening today. Thank you.
If I had the power, I would arrest you. No, of course you are quite correct. But it is directly related to the question that we have just been discussing earlier. It's very directly related to that. Everything that we've said, even about the 60s, which is obviously correct. But I think part of what has happened is that the progressive movement on the continent is in retreat. That's what I think. That progressive voice which was trying to define where should Africa go, all manner of ideas, a lot of effervescence of ideas, then died away, we were saying earlier with regard to the universities, because of the manner in which the ruling groups in the African countries acted against universities. Deal with the reality that the reality of neocolonialism on the continent. Even as you remember the big debate leading up to the formation of the OAU, when the African continent got split into 2 groups, it's called the Monrovia Group and the Casablanca Group. And that had to do with the same question that you're raising. At least that Casablanca Group was saying, our independence must not only mean that we raise the new flag. We've got to do something about our condition and do something about the nature of our relations with our former colonial powers. But I think over time, that Monrovia, the people with addresses, different addresses on the 2 sides of the card, I think that group has gained its strength. And I think the progressive movement on the continent has gone into retreat. I think particularly in the context of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So all of us have got to be talking about free markets, about deregulation, about, all of these things. the space that existed before, where you could talk about an alternative, other things other than that, seems got squeezed. So I think that really this is a big challenge that we face. This is a big challenge that we face on the continent. How do we rebuild? How do we rebuild this progressive movement on the continent? So that we come back to this matter of how do we determine our own future? What is it that we do not to depend on Jeffrey Sachs and everybody else, but to depend on ourselves. But I think in order to get there, you need to come back to this, to say, you can't change Africa without having African drivers to change the continent. Who shall those drivers be?
And it also teaches me that the role of the state is to create that enabling environment where the private sector can create wealth. But in many contexts, the public sector constrains the private sector to create that wealth. My question to you, sir, is what role do you see the African private sector in contributing to the socio-economic transformation of their societies? Some of them are challenged that their interest...
I think that everybody now accepts that the thesis that was put across exactly as you are putting it, private sector engine of growth, state facilitates, is not correct. I think it's generally accepted now, even by the strongest, earlier strongest proponents of this thesis would understand that this thesis is not right. Because both the private and the public sectors have got a role to play in this regard. And it is true. It is true indeed that the private sector must be an important player. I'm sure that you have studied Das Kapital by Karl Marx. And the reason Marx wrote about capital is, of course, of the critical importance of capital in terms of economic development. And that's one of the reasons the private sector is important, because it owns capital. So you need capital to open a factory, a capital to open a mine, and so on. The issue of peace in the DRC, yes, of course, I mean, it's a continuing challenge, particularly in the East, particularly in the Kivus. Of course, the situation even in the Kivus has spiked around quite a lot over the years, but the problem is not entirely solved, because you still have people from Indarama, from Rwanda over there. You've got the Mai, which is still there, which is armed. But I'm saying there has been progress. So it's a matter that requires a continued attention. To some extent, it's part of a larger political challenge in the Congo, in the sense that it's part of the problem of addressing the national question. Because with the Banyarwanda, in the Banyamulenge, in Eastern Congo, this is part of the problem. Partly led to the birth of this armed group called the Mai Mai, who were saying they want to evict these people who are Rwandan and not indigenous, etc. So I'm saying that it's not just a matter of disarming people. It's a matter of also addressing this national question, which is an old issue, raised originally by Mobutu. But yes, indeed. But I think that in reality, the DRC has moved a great deal forward in terms of these issues of peace over the years. And I will take a positive position about its future. That indeed, even this particular problem, particularly as it manifests itself in Eastern Congo, in the Kivus, that the problem will be solved, given what has happened in the past. And it is indeed important that it is solved, given the importance of the DRC to the continent. Professor Mamdani, I think I've answered all the questions. Thank you.
Please did not get an opportunity to ask a question. Friends and those and colleagues should understand that in an event like this, we had to expand the pool of people who could ask questions, and especially incorporate students, which is why I left the last half hour for student questions. Mr. President, most of the questions that you were asked were not about yourself. They were not about your public record. They were not about your public life. They were really about ourselves, the life that we lead. And I think they convey a deep and a widely shared unease with how things are and how things are changing, even with great ease. I want to thank you for that. You may say the university is a kind of a marketplace for ideas. And we, as a research institute, are committed to the exchange of ideas, except with one proviso, which is that arguments must be thought through, and to be thought through, they must be researched. We're committed to research and exchange. I want to thank the Vice Chancellor for hosting this occasion, for actually being with us the entire morning. The Vice Chancellor, I'm glad, is a much younger person than myself, with lots of energy. He combined the graduation with the workshop, and I don't know what next. Thank you very much. On behalf of all of you, some of you from town and others from what's called Gaon, the university in the town, I want to once again thank President Thabo Mbeki for coming here, for giving so generously of his time and for sharing his ideas with us and for shedding some light on the problems we all share in common. Thank you very much.